26 years ago, I met Josh Rawitch in Bloomington, Indiana, a kid from Los Angeles, and we connected immediately on baseball, and it was that summer that we both started our careers in the sport of baseball, working in front offices. That's where I started as an intern with a minor league team in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Josh got an internship with the Los Angeles Dodgers. I think I've done pretty well throughout my career. Josh is now the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. He's doing very well, and he joins us on Halftime right now. Josh, good to talk to you, man. How are you?
I'm good, Philly. Great to hear your voice, and great to make this happen 27 years later.
Yeah, you got that right. I told the story yesterday of sitting next to you at a Dodgers-Cubs game in the press box. 2000 was the year. I remember seeing the Dodgers hit 4 homers in an inning off of a rookie pitcher. Darren Dreifert hit 2 bombs that day. But I'll never forget meeting Vin Scully, because you were the one who introduced me to him, and it's one of the highlights of my life. Yesterday had to have been a really difficult day for you, Josh, wasn't it?
It was, but in a weird way, actually, I've kind of allowed myself to almost celebrate it more, because he lived such a full life and such an unbelievable life, and more than anything, he really knew how much he was beloved. And I think so often when people pass, they don't really realize that. And this is a guy who really, as he would say, couldn't really have asked for much more out of 94 years. And so rather than see it as a sad day, I was enjoying all the tributes and celebrations about everything he did and everybody he impacted.
He had to have met, millions of people that idolized him, not just in Southern California, but across the country. But there's only a select few who grew up listening to him that then worked with him hand in hand, like you did during your time with the Dodgers. When you first met Vin Scully, now your dad was a sports writer, so you might have met him as a kid. What did he mean to you as a child? And then what did it mean when you met him and worked with him?
Well, I never did meet him until I started working there. So as a kid, he really was. He was, along with Steve Sachs, was my idol on the field. Vin was really, in a lot of ways, who I idolized. It's what I went to IU thinking I wanted to do, was essentially become the next Vin Scully, until I heard my own voice. But, I loved the guy from the first moment I ever heard him. And so I can still remember the first time I met him, and he introduced himself and said, "Hello, Josh." And I'm like, God, I can't believe that voice. It's exactly the way it sounded on TV, but more so as time went on, and I started really working closely with him, and I got to know what just an unbelievable human he was. You worry about sometimes meeting your heroes that they're not going to live up to your expectations, and he honestly exceeded them. He just was such a kind person who always talked about your family, always wanted to know what was going on with you. It was never about him, and I just feel crazy lucky that I had that chance to work with him for as long as I did.
When you did work with him, and it was obvious Vin was such a great storyteller, along with the story of the game that he's calling. He never lost sight of that, even when he was telling stories about this and that with whatever player. What went into his prep? How did he gather all of these stories? Was it talking to the players? Was it talking to the managers? Was it just reading? Because I know he said he tried to make sure he didn't get too close with the players so that he could maintain a certain distance and call the game a certain way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think a lot of his prep work came from reading. He was a vociferous reader on planes and hotel rooms. At least certainly by the time I knew him, he was already well into his probably 70s, so it's not like he was going out every night. A lot of us would be out at the hotel bar, and he's upstairs doing prep work and reading. And he had some people who would help him from time to time in sending information, but it really wasn't necessarily, he wasn't the sort of guy that was hanging out at the batting cage trying to pick up anecdotes. He would just take it all in from a zillion different sources and then figure out, like you said, the hardest part is weaving that into the game and not making it seem like you're not actually calling a game. But he was so darn good. And some of it may have been that he was on his own. He was in a one-man booth, which is pretty rare at the big league level. But he always told me, I always feel like my job is to sell the team, to sell the experience and come to Dodger games. And I feel like I do that better if I'm talking directly to the viewer or the listener than I would be if I'm talking to somebody else telling them, hey, don't you think these people should come to the game today? So he really just had a perfect way about it, and crazy amounts of time and effort went into becoming who he was.
Yeah, he really was the best to ever do it. Being an LA native, do you have a favorite story that he ever told on a broadcast? We've heard all the great calls yesterday, but just listening to just some things that he would say in between pitches, or I heard a story that he was telling that he told during a Pirates game where the trainer saved his 16-year-old French poodle by giving it mouth to mouth. Like just weird things like that. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, man. I mean, obviously all the big calls were what I grew up with. And my favorite is clearly when he announced the birth of my son on the air, which was truly like one of the most ridiculous moments of my life. But, and I remember he would always come back from break, as you know, I think it was the fourth or fifth inning, and wrap everything up in this perfect little bow. And I remember probably late 90s, early 2000s, he wound up coming back and doing the Macarena. And I just remember thinking to myself, my God, this guy has no problem laughing at himself. He understands, who he is. He knows who he isn't. But he's the best. I wish I could come up with one, but the examples you just gave are perfect because they always tied in some really random family member who, a kid grew up in L.A., and so that's what was so good about it is he would dig the stuff up that nobody else knew.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we talk about your job, the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and when it comes to Cooperstown, it's not only just about the greatest players, but it's about telling the story of the game. What are some things for people that wanted to, learn about Vin Scully that maybe never got the chance to hear him? Future generations might be able to learn about him up in Cooperstown.
Well, what's really cool is our job is to preserve history. So whether it's the game on the field, the front office, the stories behind it, people talk about the broadcaster's wing, where the winners of the Ford Street Frick Award are honored. And it's crazy to think that Vin got that award in 1982. I think there were only like 5 or 6 people who got it before him, and then he went on to broadcast another 30-plus years after it. But that whole wing really helps you understand the history of broadcast, and as you walk around, you hear there's about 10 to 15 calls that are on a loop that you can hear from various great broadcasters, and he's one of them. It's also the same area where the baseball writers are honored with the BBWAA Award of Excellence. And so that whole wing, which includes the beginnings of a box score and baseball at the movies, you walk around that place. I think a lot of people really think the Hall of Fame is just a plaque gallery with 340 plaques on the walls, but it's a 3-story museum that is, for any baseball fan, I mean, you can't even get it done in a full day, let alone a couple hours. And there's plenty of Vin Scully stuff to be learned when you're walking around there.
Josh, when I think of Vin Scully, I think of the word class. I think of him as a romantic. I think there's the romance of baseball sometimes gets a little bit overplayed, but not when you're listening to the radio. And I got to imagine like there couldn't have ever been a better combination of broadcaster, city, and team than Vin Scully in Los Angeles with the Dodgers. And keep in mind, he's a New York native, started with Brooklyn when the Dodgers were on the East Coast. But, man, the sound of him and the sun setting at Dodger Stadium, I have a sense, man, you know how Dodger fans are famous for arriving late and leaving early. They blame it on the traffic. Maybe they just wanted to listen to Vin a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly remember going to games as a kid when radio was still, in the 80s, radio was still obviously pretty prevalent, and you would bring your radio to the game and you'd hear it sitting in the seats, and that always blew my mind that people would do that. But he was, I think Bill Plaschke wrote in his column that he was not just the greatest sports broadcaster, not just the greatest broadcaster, but really the most trusted voice in the history of Los Angeles. And that it was a guy, like you said, who grew up in New York. He was actually a Giants fan growing up, and yet here he is, the epitome of everything it means to be in Los Angeles. He never got caught up in the glitz and glamour of L.A. and Hollywood. He just went about his job every day, and it's crazy to think that you won't hear him anymore, that you won't see him. But I know that the Dodgers will continue to do all sorts of things to make sure that his legacy remains strong inside the ballpark and throughout the city of L.A.
Josh, it's got to be difficult to talk about him right now. I had trouble yesterday just because I love the sport. I love the industry. I met him once. I didn't know him on any sort of a personal level. He was a hero of yours. And I got to imagine, like you can hear it in my voice here, how do you get through these interviews talking about him?
I think when you live a life like he did that was so full and he knew how lucky he was. He so often talked about how blessed he was to do the things he did. It's easy to look at it from my perspective as a celebration as opposed to losing someone young. And in fact, I mentioned to you, I wanted to mention Nicole Hazen, where I worked at the Diamondbacks. Our general manager, Mike Hazen, just lost his wife today at a very young age. And while while Vin gets celebrated and everybody knows the amazing things he did, you're talking about someone who was in her 40s and didn't get to live a full life, and frankly, that's harder for me to talk about than it is someone who really, truly, he knew what he meant to the world around him, and he got all the praise and love that anybody would want to have in their lifetime. And unfortunately, in Nicole's case, she didn't get that. And I think about her and her family, and it reminds you how lucky we all are to have every day on the planet and make sure that we take advantage of it. And that's true. I guess when you say, how do you get through this stuff? I feel very lucky to be in this job. I feel lucky that anybody wants to ask me my opinion on Vin Scully. And I guess that's how I try to approach it.
Well, your opinion seems to matter. You know, you're the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, for crying out loud. But this is also a little bit of a different situation for a lot of people. Josh is a city boy. I mean, he's from L.A., like in Los Angeles, not one of the municipalities around it. And he worked for Arizona Diamondbacks for a while. That's Phoenix. That's another big city. Cooperstown is a rather small place. What's it like living there?
Oh, man, it's been so cool. I mean, there's so many unique things about this town. And I think what most people don't really think about, you hear Cooperstown and obviously you think of the Hall of Fame, but there's actually quite a bit of other things here that make it, for those of us who live here, there's only 2,000 people that are in the actual village itself, but the surrounding county is 50, 60,000, and there's all these little outlying kind of towns and villages. It's a really cool place to live. It's an amazing place to raise a family. It does get cold in the winter, which I have not had since we were in Indiana together. Like, I think of one of the snowstorms we had, I think, freshman year, and I kind of laugh, like that's nothing compared to what we get up here. But it's, Cooperstown really is. It's a really special place, and anybody who loves the game, I mean, you walk around and you feel it. It almost feels like you're on the Universal movie set, and it's like how this place shouldn't still exist with all of the way it feels, and yet it does. And plenty of people live here and love it, and you can count me and my family as part of that.
Josh, I have to ask, since we have you on, and somebody who has known Mr. Phil Elson for a long time before he was the professional that he is, do you have any clean, embarrassing stories from college that you can share with us?
Man.
No pledgeship stories, please.
I was going to say, I have plenty of embarrassing stories, but none of them are probably appropriate for the air. Let's just say, after we left Indiana, it got named the #1 party school in America. So chances are any story that you can think about from what you did your freshman year or sophomore year, we probably experienced it and then some. And it really is, honestly, it is so cool to watch his career over the years as he's kind of kept doing all that he's done and I've done what I've done. It's been really, really fun to stay in touch and see his success. He deserves every bit of it.
Well, and the feeling is mutual, Josh. It's been mutual from the start. And we connected on the idea that we were going to get to the big leagues at some point. Man, you are there. You are there. And I'm proud of you. Can't wait to visit you in Cooperstown at some point, man. I got to get up there. It's been too long.
Yeah, well, we'd love to have you. Hopefully anybody from out that way makes a trip. And we always say it's on everybody's bucket list, but you got to get it off the bucket list and put it on your to-do list and get out here. Come visit us in Cooperstown.
You got that
Partners
right.
at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's Wimbledon Finals, Major League Baseball, the latest fighting news, and even next season's early NFL futures. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code BLEAV. That's BLEAV to get the bonus and get into the action. Bet online, where the game starts.